Does Laura find Nick? Episode 8 of Pieces of Her begins with Laura phoning Nick and asking to meet, determined to try and settle this conflict once and for all. The collateral in all this is Jasper, who Laura decides to sacrifice in order to get her daughter back and end this nightmare. On the road, Laura receives a message from Nick, telling Laura she should take better care of her daughter. At the cabin, Nick claims to have taken her to his cabin after the car crash, having heard her screams for help. Charlie was nowhere to be seen though, and he admits that Clara is long gone. He also broaches the subject of seeing him again, understanding that it must be a shock to see him. However, he has unfinished business with Laura, which he intends to resolve. Laura shows up at the cabin with her suitcase, where Nick comes outside and sees her. Looking her in the eyes, Nick holds Laura close before frisking her, making sure she's not carrying a gun. Nick admits that Andy is okay and walks with Laura hand in hand back inside. What happens in the cabin? Nick is not happy that Laura kept her pregnancy from him. Laura admits that she was too busy keeping tabs on her family and working with Nick in Oslo to give it much thought. When he slams the suitcase on the table, sifting through what's inside, he demands to know where it is. That it happens to be a tape, which Nick eventually finds and plays, using his tape recorder. The details of this incriminate Jasper, who was working in collusion with Nick this whole time. Laura has been keeping hold of this tape the whole time to use as collateral against her family and Nick, should they come after her. Now that Nick is in possession of this, it raises big question marks over what's going to happen next. Nick demands Laura come clean about what happened in Oslo, and he senses an opportunity and throws a lamp across the room. She realizes that Nick was the one who crashed into their car intentionally and left Charlie to die. The lamp explodes on impact, setting the place alight. As the money burns and Nick skips away, Laura and Andy stumble out the cabin. Do Michael and Andy get there happily ever after? Michael is on the mend, Andy shows up and the pair talk. He thanks her for helping, as he admits the doctors found a needle mark where he was punctured by some sort of respiratory paralytic. This is likely to have been caused by the runner who bumped into him under the bridge. Andy actually saved his life by doing CPR and calling the paramedics. He's en route to DC, where he's about to be debriefed and potentially lose his job too. However, he suggests they go for dinner sometime when he swings back through town. While Andy does agree, she also wants some time to process everything that's happened so far. What is the real mission of the butterflies? Peacemaker, meanwhile, is led down the corridor where the cow happens to be groaning, sparks emanating around it. The two remaining butterflies, Detective Song and Captain Locke, want to move the cow out of there. It turns out they're not doing this for power, they actually took a vow. Song confirms that the butterflies traveled across to Earth because their own planet had become unlivable. Earth had the habitat they needed, but with no food consumption, they brought the cow over to help them all survive for the next 100 years. However, realizing that our world is messed up, with those in power valuing greed over the welfare of the planet, hurtling toward a devastating climate-changed future, the butterflies took a vow to step in and change that. They wanted to make the choices for humans in order to save humanity, no matter how many lives that cost. Myrn disapproved, believing they couldn't impose their will, which explains why he was killed. Peacemaker makes his choice and kills the butterflies, activating the human torpedo, so Leota smashes into the cow head first. Tellingly, Peacemaker doesn't kill the butterfly that drops out of Song's mouth. How does Pieces of Her end? As dawn breaks, Andy collects up her gear and heads out, running all the way to the beach, where she finds Laura staring at the water. She couldn't sleep and needed to get away from it all. Laura admits she never wanted to move there, but when she first saw the ocean, she ran into the water, allowing her to think that things will be okay after all. How does Peacemaker Season 1 end? Meanwhile, Emilia survives and after awakening, holds Peacemaker's hand, grateful that he stood by her side the whole time. Economos leaves the hospital and heads to Belle Reve Penitentiary, a picture of the gang in hand. That butterfly we saw before? Well, it's actually with Peacemaker, and he feeds it while Eagly continues to stay by his side. However, Peacemaker is still haunted by the memory of his father. What is on the tape in the suitcase? The suitcase, which is full of money and is discovered by Andy on her mother's instructions, remains a constant point of intrigue. The source of the money raises all kinds of questions until it is revealed that the cash is actually the ransom payment for the professor kidnapped by Nick all those years ago. When Nick goes into hiding after Martin's murder, Jane keeps the suitcase for herself, realizing she and her unborn daughter might need the funds someday, since she expects Nick to track her down and confront her, which is what essentially happens. However, it is not the money, but something else entirely that is hidden in the suitcase and is of utmost importance. When Nick finally gets his hands on it, he brushes the money aside and quickly finds a small tape hidden in the suitcase's lining. The tape holds a voice recording proving that Jasper Queller, who succeeded Martin, collaborated with Nick in the planned ink bomb attack on his father. Since Jasper is in the running for vice president, the tape is essentially the key to blackmailing one of the most powerful men in the country. This also explains why Jasper tries to steal the suitcase from Andy, but is eventually thwarted. Ultimately, it appears the tape is destroyed since Jasper seems to be firmly in control of the situation at the end and doesn't seem to fear being blackmailed anymore. Of course, if the story does continue, we could find out that Laura or Andy actually picked up the tape at the last moment, which would once again turn the tables in the mother and daughter's favor. However, it seems unlikely they will use it to blackmail Jasper. Pieces of Her Season 2 release date? Pieces of Her Season 1 premiered on March 4, 2022, on Netflix. All 8 episodes of the season, each having a runtime of between 45 minutes and an hour, were released simultaneously on the streaming platform. As far as Season 2 is concerned, there have been no official announcements as to whether it has been greenlit or not. However, fans of the show needn't lose heart yet, as we just might get to see more of Laura and Andrea's intriguing story. Despite Season 1 ending with some incredible revelations about Laura's past and answering most of the questions raised at the start of the show, there are still some significant hurdles for the mother-daughter duo to cross. Most notably, Andrea now knows her mother's guilty and violent secret but chooses not to reveal it. Another aspect that strongly hints that there is more to the story is the ominous call Jasper makes to Laura near the end of the Season 1 finale. The conversation tells us that the corrupt new vice president is now blackmailing Laura, so it is unlikely that the story will leave off at such a juncture. Comparing the series to the novel it is based on paints a similar picture. Despite the book being a standalone narrative with no sequels, so far there are important parts of the book's ending that are not seen in the series. This includes Nick's time in prison and Laura's subsequent visits with him, trying to get a confession out of the convicted man. Jasper also seems to play a more prominent role in the whole messy affair in the book. All these aspects of the novel could make for a very interesting Season 2 indeed. And so, despite there being no confirmation as yet about Season 2, we are pretty hopeful that a follow-up chapter will be made. Of course, the viewership numbers of Season 1 and how well it does with audiences is also a significant factor likely to be taken into consideration. If greenlit relatively soon, we can expect to see Pieces of Her Season 2 sometime around mid-2023. Pieces of Her Season 2 plot. What can it be about? Season 1 closes with the explosive revelation that it is actually Jane, aka Laura, and not Nick who masterminds the murder of her father, Martin Queller. In the closing moments of the Season 1 finale, Andy learns the truth, but chooses not to confront her mother. However, Jasper also figures out that Laura had a hand in their father's murder and hints that he plans to blackmail her using that information. The potential Season 2 could pick up from the aforementioned tense situation and likely open with Jasper's demands to his sister. We could also find out more about Nick's fate and whether he is able to save himself from a lifetime in prison by uncovering the truth about who killed Martin Queller. Finally, the complex dynamic between Laura and Andy will continue to develop, and for the first time, it appears that the daughter knows almost everything that is going on. When and if Season 2 does premiere, we could see mother and daughter united in a formidable team against Jasper and the vengeful Paula Kund, who has promised to kill Laura.